Y&R shocker, Nikki's secret, Nick's dangerous spiral and Matt's unexpected future. What if the biggest threat to the Newman family isn't an enemy, but a secret hidden inside their own home? While Victor Newman senses that something is terribly wrong, Nikki continues to hide a devastating diagnosis that could change her life forever. At the same time, Nick Newman finds himself standing on the edge of a dangerous relapse, fighting a battle that no one around him fully understands. And just when Genoa City thinks Matt Clark has finally changed, new tensions, old betrayals, and unresolved emotions threaten to pull him back toward the darkness he worked so hard to escape. But that's not all. A surprising connection begins to grow between Matt and Phyllis, creating a relationship that nobody saw coming. Could this unexpected bond become the beginning of a powerful new chapter, or the spark that ignites an even bigger disaster? Stay with us until the end, because every decision made today could completely change the future of the Newman family tomorrow. The morning sunlight stretched across Genoa City, but peace was the last thing on Nikki Newman's mind. She sat quietly, staring out the window, trying to convince herself that everything was under control. Yet deep inside, fear continued to grow stronger. The diagnosis haunted her every waking moment. The mass pressing against her optic nerve wasn't something she could simply ignore. Every headache felt more intense. Every moment of blurred vision reminded her that time might not be on her side. Still, there was one person she refused to tell. Victor Newman. For years, Victor had been her protector, her partner, and sometimes her greatest challenge. But now Nikki believed revealing the truth would only create more pain. Unfortunately, Victor was far too perceptive to accept her explanations. Recently, he had noticed every hesitation, every forced smile, and every attempt Nikki made to hide her discomfort. Something wasn't adding up. Meanwhile, Victoria Newman found herself trapped between loyalty and responsibility. Watching her mother suffer in silence was becoming unbearable. Victoria understood why Nikki wanted privacy, but she also knew Victor deserved the truth. More importantly, Nikki needed support. She couldn't fight this battle alone. As Victoria prepared herself for another difficult conversation with her mother, Victor was conducting an investigation of his own. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. And his instincts were screaming that Nikki was hiding something serious. Across town, Nick Newman faced a completely different struggle. The emotional weight of recent events had begun taking a toll. Recovery wasn't a straight path. Some days felt manageable. Others felt impossible. Today was one of the impossible days. Nick tried distracting himself with work, family responsibilities, and endless meetings. Yet none of it quieted the storm inside his head. The temptation lingered. A dangerous whisper from his past. A reminder of how easy it would be to escape reality, even temporarily. Nick hated himself for thinking about it. But addiction didn't disappear simply because someone wanted it to. It waited patiently. Looking for weakness. Searching for opportunity. And right now, Nick felt vulnerable. Elsewhere, Matt Clark was attempting to move forward with his life. The return of his memories had forced him to confront painful truths about who he had been and who he wanted to become. Many people still viewed him through the lens of his past mistakes. But Matt wanted something different. He wanted a future. A real future. And surprisingly, one person continued to occupy his thoughts. Phyllis Summers. Despite everything that had happened between them, Matt couldn't deny the connection he felt. It wasn't just attraction. It was understanding. They both knew what it felt like to be judged. To make mistakes. To seek redemption. And perhaps that shared experience was bringing them closer than either expected. By the end of the day, Matt made a decision. He was going to ask Phyllis out. Not as a game. Not as manipulation. But as a genuine chance to explore what might exist between them. Little did he know, this simple decision would trigger events that nobody could have predicted. The tension in Genoa City deepened as the day unfolded, as if the entire city was holding its breath waiting for something to break. Nikki Newman tried to maintain her composure, but Victoria Newman wasn't ready to let the matter go. This time, Victoria didn't approach her mother gently. She came prepared to push harder. "Mom, you can't keep doing this alone," Victoria said, her voice controlled but firm. Nikki turned away immediately. "I am not alone," she replied quickly. "I have everything under control." But Victoria had heard those words before, and they never meant what they claimed to mean. At the same time, Victor Newman was growing increasingly suspicious. He had spent his entire life reading people. Business rivals, enemies, allies, even family. And Nikki was now the most difficult puzzle he had ever faced. Her eyes avoided his. Her answers were too careful. Her pain was too hidden. Victor decided he would not wait any longer. If Nikki refused to tell him the truth, he would find it himself. Across town, Nick Newman sat alone in his office, staring at nothing in particular. His phone buzzed. He didn't answer it. Another message came in. Still ignored. The world outside felt distant, almost unreal. Inside his mind, the battle had already begun. The memory of pain relief, the false calm, the temporary escape, it all resurfaced without warning. Nick clenched his jaw. "No," he whispered to himself. "But addiction doesn't respond to logic. It responds to stress." And Nick's life was full of it. A knock came at the door. He quickly straightened, trying to mask the internal chaos. But the temptation didn't disappear. It only waited. Meanwhile, Matt Clark prepared for something unfamiliar. A date. Not a scheme. Not a strategy. A real attempt at connection. Phyllis Summers arrived at the shadow room with her usual confidence, but there was something different in her expression tonight. Caution. Curiosity. Maybe even uncertainty. "You actually followed through," Phyllis said, glancing at Matt as she sat down. Matt offered a slight smile. "I said I would." Their conversation began lightly, careful humor, guarded compliments, subtle testing of boundaries. But underneath it all, something real started to form. Phyllis noticed it first. Matt wasn't playing games. Not this time. But Genoa City never allowed peace to last long. At the entrance of the shadow room, Noah Newman appeared. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. The moment Noah saw Matt, his expression tightened. The past came rushing back, old wounds, unresolved anger, buried resentment. Phyllis immediately sensed the shift. "Don't," she warned softly, trying to prevent what was coming. But Noah didn't listen. He approached their table. Slowly. Deliberately. "Didn't expect to see you here," Noah said, eyes locked on Matt. Matt remained calm, but his stillness carried weight. Phyllis tried to intervene. "Let's not do this tonight," she said. But Noah's focus never moved. "You always find your way back into chaos, don't you?" Noah added, voice sharp. The tension thickened instantly. Matt's expression changed, not anger, but something more controlled, more dangerous. Something he had worked hard to suppress. Phyllis stood halfway between them, realizing this wasn't just an argument. It was a trigger. Elsewhere, Victoria met Nate Hastings, hoping for reassurance about Nikki's condition. But the answer she received wasn't what she wanted. It was worse than she expected. Nothing about Nikki's diagnosis was simple. Nothing about the outcome was certain. And that uncertainty terrified Victoria more than anything else. Back at the shadow room, the confrontation escalated. Noah leaned in slightly. "Some people never change," he said. Matt finally spoke. Quietly. But with intensity. "You don't know anything about me." That single sentence shifted everything. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Phyllis realized this was the moment where everything could spiral. And somewhere deep inside Matt, something dark stirred. Something he thought he had buried. But Genoa City had a way of resurrecting old versions of people. No matter how hard they tried to escape them. And tonight, that past was dangerously close to returning. The night in Genoa City deepened, but the tension inside the shadow room only intensified. Phyllis Summers could feel it in the air, something fragile was about to snap. She had seen conflict before. She had even created her fair share of it. But this felt different. This wasn't about ego or pride anymore. This was about buried history colliding with unresolved pain. Matt Clark stood perfectly still, but his silence was no longer calm. It was controlled restraint. Noah Newman refused to back down. "You always talk like you've changed," Noah said, his voice low but sharp. "But people don't just erase who they are." Matt finally turned his head slightly. Not fully facing Noah. Just enough to respond. "I'm not the same man you're talking about," he said. Noah let out a short, humorless laugh. "Everyone in this city says that right before they prove otherwise." Phyllis stepped in immediately. "This is pointless. Both of you need to stop." But neither man moved. The energy between them had already locked into place. A point of no return was forming. Outside the shadow room, the city carried on as if nothing was happening. But inside, Matt's past was beginning to surface in fragments. Memories he didn't ask for. Faces he didn't want to remember. Choices he wished he could undo. And then, something unexpected happened. Phyllis placed a hand lightly on Matt's arm. It was subtle but grounding. Enough to pull him back. Just slightly. "You don't have to react to him," she said quietly. For a moment, Matt's breathing steadied. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted. No one noticed immediately. And that only fueled him further. "Interesting," Noah said, glancing between them. "So that's what this is?" Phyllis narrowed her eyes. "It's none of your business." But Noah wasn't done. His focus sharpened. "You really think he's safe?" he asked Phyllis directly. That question hit differently. Not an insult. A challenge. A seed of doubt. Meanwhile, across town, Nick Newman's internal battle was reaching a dangerous peak. The stress of the day, the emotional weight of family secrets, and the silent pressure building inside him all collided at once. He sat alone again. This time, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud. Too loud. A drawer nearby caught his attention. He stared at it for a long moment. His expression changed, conflicted, shaken, exhausted. He stood up. Took a step. Stopped. "No," he said again, more firmly. But his hands were shaking. The temptation wasn't just memory anymore. It felt close. Real. Dangerously accessible. Nick turned away sharply and grabbed his phone instead, trying to reach someone who could pull him back from the edge. But even as the phone rang, his eyes drifted back to the drawer. The battle wasn't over. It was escalating. At the Newman estate, Victoria's desperation grew. She returned home and immediately found Victor Newman in his study. He already knew something was wrong. Before she could speak, Victor looked up. "Your mother is hiding something," he said flatly. Victoria froze. So he had noticed too. That made everything worse. "She's sick, Dad," Victoria finally admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "And she won't tell you the truth." Victor's expression changed instantly. Not shock. Not confusion. Focus. Cold, calculated focus. "What kind of illness?" he asked. Victoria hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. Back at the shadow room, the confrontation between Matt and Noah reached its breaking point. Noah leaned in again. "You think you're different now," he said. "But all it takes is one push." Matt's jaw tightened. Phyllis stepped forward. "Enough." But Noah's words landed anyway. And something inside Matt shifted. Not fully. Not completely. But enough to be felt. A flicker. A shadow of the man he used to be. Phyllis saw it. And for the first time that night, she looked uncertain. Not about Noah. Not about the situation. About Matt. Because Genoa City had a cruel truth that never changed. People could try to reinvent themselves, but the past always knew where to find them. The final stretch of the night in Genoa City carried a weight that no one inside the shadow room could ignore anymore. The confrontation between Matt Clark and Noah Newman had reached a fragile silence, but not peace. Silence in Genoa City was never safety. It was the moment right before everything exploded. Phyllis Summers stood between them, her instincts screaming that this situation was no longer under control. She had seen men pushed to their limits before. But Matt was different tonight. He wasn't reacting. He was holding back something that wanted to come out. Noah broke the silence first. "You can pretend all you want," he said quietly. "But I know what kind of man you used to be." Matt didn't answer immediately. His eyes lowered slightly. A long pause followed. Then he spoke. "I used to be someone who let anger decide everything," he said. "That version of me doesn't get to control what happens next." Phyllis exhaled slowly, almost unaware she had been holding her breath. For a brief moment, it looked like the tension might finally dissolve. But Noah wasn't satisfied. He looked at Phyllis, then back at Matt. "And you trust him?" Noah asked her directly. That question hit harder than any insult. Phyllis didn't answer right away. Because it wasn't a simple question anymore. It was about risk. About history. About whether people truly change or just learn how to hide it better. Before she could respond, Matt stepped slightly forward. But not aggressively. Defensively. "I'm not here to fight you," Matt said firmly. "And I'm not here to prove anything." That was the truth. But truth doesn't always stop consequences. Across Genoa City, Nick Newman's situation reached a critical turning point. He stood in his office again, breathing unevenly. The drawer was still there. Still waiting. Still silent. But inside Nick's mind, everything was screaming. The addiction wasn't just temptation anymore. It was pressure. Memory. Escape. Relief. And pain all at once. His hand moved slowly toward the drawer. Then stopped midair. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Nick stepped back instantly, as if waking from a trance. "Come in," he called out, voice strained. The interruption didn't solve the problem. It only delayed it. Nick knew that. And deep down, he feared the next time he was alone, the outcome might be different. At the Newman estate, Victor Newman finally got the truth, but only partially. Victoria stood in front of him, emotional, conflicted. "Nikki has a mass," she admitted. "It's pressing on her optic nerve." Victor's expression darkened instantly. Not anger at Victoria. Not confusion about Nikki. But something far more dangerous. Controlled fury. "Why wasn't I told sooner?" he asked. Victoria swallowed hard. "Because she didn't want you to worry." Victor let out a slow breath. That answer was not acceptable to him. Not for Nikki. Not for anyone. And now Victor Newman had a new mission. Protect Nikki. Fix the situation. Control the outcome. No matter what it took. Back at the shadow room, the situation between Matt and Noah finally reached its breaking point, but not in the way anyone expected. Noah took a step closer. "You always end up dragging people into your mess," he said. Matt's expression changed slightly. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. Control. Phyllis immediately stepped in. "That's enough, Noah." But the damage was done. Something inside Matt had been touched. Not broken. But stirred. And for a split second. Just a fraction. The room felt like it shifted. Matt exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but heavier. "This conversation is over." Noah hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Phyllis noticed it immediately. Matt hadn't exploded. He hadn't lost control. He had done something more unsettling. He had contained it. But containment is never the same as peace. Later that night, Phyllis walked beside Matt outside the shadow room. The air was cooler now. Quieter. But tension still lingered between them. "You handled that better than I expected," Phyllis admitted. Matt glanced at her. "That's not a compliment," he said lightly. Phyllis smirked slightly. "No, it kind of is." A brief silence followed. Then Phyllis asked the question that had been building all night. "Who are you really trying to be, Matt?" He didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't simple. Finally, he said, "Someone who doesn't go back." Phyllis studied him carefully. And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether she believed him or wanted to. Somewhere across the city, Nick Newman closed his office door and leaned against it. Still fighting. Still resisting. Still not safe. Victor Newman stared at Nikki's empty room with a determination that promised action. And Matt Clark walked into the night with Phyllis Summers beside him, while the past quietly followed behind them. Because in Genoa City, nothing ever truly ends. It only waits for the next trigger. End of story arc.